3 in the morning, August 16th, 1977, 12 hours before the world would lose Elvis Presley forever. He's standing in the basement of Graceland, holding a red gasoline can in one hand and a book of matches in the other. Behind him, stacked from floor to ceiling like a paper fortress, are hundreds of cardboard boxes, each one filled with documents, photographs, and recordings that could destroy not just his career, but the entire foundation of American entertainment as we know it. His hands are shaking, not from the pills this time, from pure, unfiltered terror. What was inside those boxes that made the king of rock and roll willing to burn down everything he'd spent 20 years building? What secret was so devastating that Elvis Aaron Presley chose to spend his final hours on Earth trying to erase it from history? The answer involves a betrayal so deep it came from the person he trusted more than his own father. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, connecting the White House to the Vegas Strip through a web of blackmail and blood money. And a truth about Elvis Presley that his estate has been desperately covering up for nearly 50 years. Here's what they didn't want you to know. Elvis didn't just stumble into fame. He was manufactured, controlled, used as a puppet in a game so big that when he finally tried to cut his strings, they were willing to kill him to keep him quiet. But here's the part that will change everything you think you know about how the king really died. Elvis didn't burn everything that night. He hid one box, one final piece of evidence that would surface decades later in the most unexpected place, carrying proof that would make the Kennedy assassination look like a minor cover-up. That evidence is still out there, and the people who killed Elvis are still protecting the secret it contains. To understand why Elvis Presley was ready to destroy his entire legacy, we need to go back 3 months. Back to the phone call that shattered his world and set him on a collision course with forces that had been controlling him since he was 19 years old. It was May 10th, 1977, 2 in the morning on a Tuesday night at Graceland. Elvis had just finished his nightly ritual of reading fan mail when the phone rang in his bedroom. The caller ID showed a number he recognized but hadn't seen in weeks: Colonel Tom Parker. Now you have to understand something about the relationship between Elvis and the Colonel by this point. They barely spoke anymore. Their partnership had become a cold war of mutual resentment and financial dependency. So when Parker's gravelly voice came through the receiver at 2 a.m., Elvis knew something was very, very wrong. "Elvis, my boy," Parker said, and Elvis could hear the forced cheerfulness masking something darker. "I have the most exciting news, the biggest opportunity of your career." The Colonel painted a picture that should have sounded like a dream. A multi-year residency deal in Las Vegas, not just any venue, but a custom-built theater that would bear Elvis's name. $50 million guaranteed, more money than Elvis had ever seen in a single contract. Complete creative control. His own orchestra, his own dancers, his own everything. "It's everything we've worked for," Parker insisted. "Your permanent kingdom in Vegas. No more touring, no more traveling. Just you on your throne where you belong." But Elvis had learned to read between the lines of the Colonel's promises. "What's the catch, Colonel? There's always a catch with you." There was a pause, a long, telling silence that made Elvis's stomach clench with dread. "Well, there are some contractual obligations, nothing you need to worry about. I've already handled the paperwork." That's when Elvis's blood went cold. "What paperwork? I haven't signed anything." "You don't need to sign anything, my boy. I have power of attorney. Remember, you gave me full authority to negotiate on your behalf." Elvis felt the room spin. Power of attorney. Those 3 words that he'd signed away when he was young and trusting and desperate for success. Words that had slowly transformed from protection into prison bars. "Colonel, I want to see every document before anything gets finalized." Another pause, then Parker's voice changed, became harder, more threatening. "Elvis, this deal is already done. The investors are expecting you to start performances in 3 months. These are not people you disappoint." "What investors? Who are we talking about here?" "Vincent Torrino and his associates." The name hit Elvis like a physical blow. Vincent, the Hammer Torino. Everyone in Vegas knew that name, and everyone with half a brain stayed as far away from it as possible. Torino wasn't just connected to organized crime. He was organized crime. A man who had allegedly ordered more hits than Elvis had #1 records. "Colonel, please tell me you didn't make a deal with the mob." "I prefer to call them alternative financing partners." Elvis hung up the phone. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely get the receiver back in its cradle. But the shaking wasn't from fear of Torino or his goons. It was from a growing realization that was far more terrifying. He'd been set up, not just for this deal but for everything, for years. The next morning, Elvis drove straight to Parker's office in Memphis. He found the colonel behind his desk, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and photographs that made Elvis's blood run cold. Photos of Elvis entering and leaving buildings he didn't remember visiting. Photos of him meeting with people he'd forgotten about. Photos that could be taken out of context and used to destroy him. "Colonel, what is this?" Parker looked up with the expression of a man who no longer needed to pretend. "Insurance, Elvis. I've been protecting both of us for a very long time." "Protecting us from what?" "From the consequences of your lifestyle choices." Elvis moved closer to the desk, and that's when he saw them. Transcripts, pages and pages of typed conversations, his conversations, private phone calls he'd made from Graceland, personal moments he'd shared with friends, with women, with his own family. "You've been recording me." "I've been documenting everything, Elvis. Your drug use, your encounters with various women, your financial indiscretions, even some of your more politically sensitive statements." Elvis felt his knees go weak. "How long?" "Since 1968. The comeback special was when I realized how unpredictable you'd become. I needed leverage to keep you focused." The room was spinning now. 8 years, nearly a decade of his most private moments, recorded and catalogued like evidence in a criminal case. "You son of a bitch." Now, Elvis, let's keep this professional. These recordings have kept you out of prison more times than you know, but now they serve a different purpose. Mr. Torino is very interested in your cooperation with his Vegas venture, and these tapes ensure that cooperation will be enthusiastic. Elvis stared at the man who had controlled his career for over 20 years, the man he had trusted with everything, and for the first time he saw Parker for what he really was, not a manager, not a protector, a parasite who had been feeding off Elvis's success while slowly poisoning everything around them. "What happens if I refuse?" Parker smiled, and it was the coldest expression Elvis had ever seen. "You won't refuse, my boy, because refusing means these tapes become public. Refusing means criminal investigations. Refusing means your daughter grows up knowing exactly what kind of man her father really is." That night, Elvis sat alone in his bedroom at Graceland, staring at the phone on his nightstand. He picked up the receiver and dialed a number he'd memorized as a child, the number for Graceland's groundskeeper who tended the meditation garden where his mother was buried. "Jimmy, it's Elvis. I know it's late, but could you put the phone by Mama's grave? I need to talk to her." What Elvis whispered to his mother's grave that night, the promises he made and the forgiveness he begged for, would remain between him and the darkness. But when he hung up that phone, something had changed in his eyes, a hardness that his friends would notice in the coming weeks, a resolve that scared the people who knew him best. Because Elvis Presley had made a decision that night. He would not spend the rest of his life as Colonel Parker's puppet. He would not perform for the mob like a trained animal. And he would not let his daughter inherit a legacy built on lies and blood money. But Elvis didn't know that someone else had been listening to that phone call. Someone who had been watching him for months, documenting his every move, waiting for exactly this moment of vulnerability. Someone who worked inside Graceland itself, who had access to his most private moments and his deepest secrets. Someone who was about to make Colonel Parker's betrayal look like a friendly misunderstanding. 6 months earlier, November 1976. while Elvis was performing in Vegas, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned inside out. A woman named Jennifer Walsh was sitting in a government office building in Washington, D.C., being briefed on the most sensitive assignment of her career. Jennifer was 28 years old, auburn hair, green eyes, the kind of wholesome beauty that made people instantly trust her. She had a degree in psychology from Georgetown and 3 years of experience with the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division. On paper, she was being recruited for a clerical position at Graceland, administrative assistant to help manage Elvis Presley's increasingly chaotic personal affairs. In reality, she was being planted as a spy in the home of America's biggest entertainer. Miss Walsh, the man across from her said, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Elvis Presley is not just a singer, he's a national security concern. The folder contained photographs that made Jennifer's stomach turn. Elvis meeting with known communist sympathizers in Europe during his army service. Financial records showing mysterious payments from overseas accounts. Hotel receipts from countries that were officially off-limits to American civilians. In 1970, Elvis Presley met with President Nixon and volunteered to serve as an informal intelligence asset. He was supposed to report back on communist influences in the entertainment industry, particularly during his international appearances. Jennifer flipped through more photos. Elvis at parties with foreign diplomats. Elvis backstage with musicians who had known ties to anti-American organizations. Elvis in deep conversation with people whose faces had been circled in red ink. We believe he's been turned. That somewhere along the way, Elvis Presley became a double agent working against American interests. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Large cash deposits that couldn't be explained by his legitimate income. Private flights to countries he had no business visiting. Most disturbing of all, recordings of phone conversations where Elvis seemed to be speaking in some kind of code. Your job is simple, Miss Walsh. Get close to him, document everything, find out who he's really working for and what information he's been passing along. 3 weeks later, Jennifer Walsh walked through the gates of Graceland for the first time, carrying a small suitcase and the weight of betraying a man she'd never met. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Colonel Parker was recording Elvis to blackmail him, and Elvis was planning to record Parker to expose him, the federal government had planted someone to record them all. Jennifer quickly discovered that Graceland was nothing like the den of communist conspiracy she'd been led to expect. It was chaos, yes, but the chaos of a man slowly drowning under the weight of his own fame. Elvis was paranoid, drug-dependent, and increasingly isolated, but he wasn't a traitor, he was just broken. The mysterious overseas payments, charitable donations to organizations helping American prisoners of war, the coded phone conversations, Elvis trying to communicate with his daughter without revealing personal details to whoever might be listening, the meetings with foreign nationals, a desperate man seeking spiritual guidance from anyone who might have answers. But Jennifer's handlers weren't interested in the truth. They wanted confirmation of their suspicions, and when she reported that Elvis appeared to be innocent of espionage, they accused her of being compromised by her target. Agent Walsh, your job is not to psychoanalyze the subject. Your job is to gather evidence of his treasonous activities. Sir, I've been in his home for 4 months. I've seen his private correspondence, his financial records, his personal conversations. There's no evidence of treason here. Then you're not looking hard enough. The pressure intensified in early 1977. Jennifer received new orders. Elvis was becoming increasingly vocal about exposing corruption in the music industry. His plans to go public with information about Colonel Parker could compromise ongoing federal investigations into organized crime's influence in entertainment. She was ordered to sabotage Elvis's evidence gathering, delete files, steal documents, destroy anything that could interfere with the government's own agenda. For the first time in her career, Jennifer Walsh considered refusing a direct order. The moment that changed everything came on a warm April night. Jennifer was working late in Elvis's private office, photographing financial documents, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She quickly turned off her camera and pretended to be filing paperwork, but it was too late. Elvis stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. Complete and utter betrayal. "How long?" he asked quietly. Jennifer's training kicked in: deny everything, maintain cover at all costs, but looking into Elvis's eyes, she couldn't do it anymore. 6 months. Who do you work for? The FBI. Elvis closed his eyes and leaned against the doorframe like he'd been physically hit. When he opened them again, there were tears. "Jesus, Jennifer, I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone." "Elvis, please let me explain." "Explain what?" "That everything I suspected was true, that even my own government wants to destroy me." Jennifer took a step toward him, and he backed away like she was carrying a disease. "They think you're a communist spy." Elvis laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter understanding. "Of course they do, because a poor kid from Mississippi couldn't possibly become this successful without help from America's enemies, right?" "I know you're not a spy, Elvis. I've told them that, but they won't listen." "What do they want from me?" Jennifer knew she was about to cross a line that would end her career, but she couldn't stop herself. "They want you to stop investigating Parker. They say it could compromise federal operations." "What operations?" "They've been using Parker as an informant. All those mob connections, all those criminal associates. Parker's been reporting on them for years. He's their window into organized crime in Vegas." The color drained from Elvis's face. "So the government has been protecting the man who's been stealing from me and blackmailing me." "Elvis, there's more. They know about the Vincent Tarino deal. They know Parker owes money to the mob, and they're willing to let you get hurt to protect their source." Elvis slumped into his desk chair like all the fight had gone out of him. "So I can't escape Parker without destroying myself, but staying with him means becoming a slave to criminals and the government." "There's something else," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've ordered me to make sure you don't have any evidence to expose Parker. I'm supposed to destroy anything you've collected." Elvis looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much betrayal for one lifetime. "And are you going to do it?" Jennifer Walsh stared at the man she'd been sent to spy on, the man who had treated her like family, the man whose only real crime was trusting the wrong people. "No," she said, "I'm not." But just as Elvis thought he finally understood the full scope of the conspiracy surrounding him, the sound of a car pulling up Graceland's driveway changed everything. Through the office window, they could see headlights cutting through the darkness. Elvis recognized the car immediately. It belonged to his ex-wife, Priscilla, and the fact that she was arriving at Graceland at 3 in the morning, unannounced, meant only one thing. She discovered something that was about to make everything infinitely worse. What Priscilla revealed that night would force Elvis to make a choice that haunts his estate to this day. Priscilla Presley had been married to Elvis for 6 years and divorced from him for 3, but she still had a key to Graceland. She used it that night without knocking, walking through the front door like a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Elvis and Jennifer met her in the living room. Priscilla's usually perfect composure was shattered. Her hands were shaking, her makeup smeared from crying, and she was clutching a manila envelope like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Elvis, we need to talk, privately." Jennifer started to leave, but Elvis stopped her. "Whatever you have to say, she can hear it. She's the only person in this house I can trust right now." Priscilla looked between Elvis and Jennifer, reading the tension in the room. The FBI agent. Elvis's head snapped toward Jennifer. "You told her." "I've known for months," Priscilla said quietly. "The same investigative journalist who approached me also told me about the government surveillance. Elvis, they've been watching our daughter too." The words hit Elvis like a physical blow. Lisa Marie was 9 years old. 9 years old and already caught up in the web of conspiracy that was slowly strangling her father. What journalist? What are you talking about? Priscilla opened the manila envelope and spread its contents across Elvis's coffee table. Photographs, financial documents, hotel receipts, and sworn affidavits from people Elvis had trusted with his life. His name is David Morrison. He's been investigating Colonel Parker for 2 years. Elvis, everything you think you know about your career is a lie. The first photograph showed a young Tom Parker in 1955, not in America where he claimed to be discovering Elvis, but in Havana, Cuba, shaking hands with Mayor Lansky, one of the most powerful organized crime figures in history. The Colonel wasn't managing country music acts before he found you. He was laundering money for the mob through entertainment ventures in Cuba. When Castro took over and the mob operations got shut down, Parker needed a new vehicle for moving dirty money. Elvis stared at the photograph. You're saying he found me on purpose. I'm saying he created you on purpose. Every major decision in your career, every contract, every business deal was designed to maximize cash flow for criminal organizations. Your success wasn't accidental, Elvis. It was engineered. Jennifer leaned forward, studying the documents. This explains the overseas payments we've been investigating. They weren't going to communist organizations. They were going to offshore accounts controlled by American crime families. Priscilla nodded grimly. The journalist has bank records going back to 1956. Millions of dollars from Elvis's earnings flowing through shell companies in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Panama. All of it ending up in the hands of people whose names appear on FBI most wanted lists. Elvis's voice was barely a whisper. How much? Conservative estimate, 60% of everything you've ever earned. The room went silent. Elvis had always known Parker was stealing from him, but this was beyond theft. This was systematic looting of his entire life's work. There's more, Priscilla continued, her voice cracking. David Morrison has been in contact with former members of your security team, people who left your employment under mysterious circumstances over the years. She pulled out a tape recorder and set it on the coffee table. This is Red West. He agreed to be interviewed before his death last year. Red West's voice filled the room, gravelly and tired. I tried to tell Elvis what was happening, but Parker had him convinced I was jealous, that I was trying to undermine their partnership. The truth is, I started noticing patterns. Phone calls Parker would take in private. Meetings with people who sure as hell weren't music industry executives. Money changing hands that never showed up in any official records. The recording continued. The final straw for me was 1974. Elvis was supposed to do a European tour, but Parker cancelled it at the last minute. Claimed visa issues. But I overheard Parker on the phone telling someone that moving Elvis overseas would complicate their business arrangements. That's when I knew for certain that Elvis's career was being controlled by people who didn't give a damn about his music. Elvis reached over and turned off the recorder. Red died of a heart attack. At age 43, in perfect health, 3 days before he was supposed to meet with federal investigators. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Red West hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered to keep him quiet. Elvis, Priscilla said, taking his hands in hers, they've threatened Lisa Marie. The world stopped. Elvis's vision went grey around the edges, and for a moment he thought he might pass out. What did you say? 2 weeks ago, Lisa Marie came home from school upset. She said a man had approached her on the playground, told her he was a family friend, and asked her about Daddy's work. When she mentioned it to her teacher, they called me immediately. Priscilla pulled out a photograph from the envelope. It showed Lisa Marie walking out of her school, and someone had drawn crosshairs over her face in red ink. This was in my mailbox the next morning, along with a note that said, "Make sure Daddy keeps his mouth shut, or little Lisa won't make it to her 10th birthday." Elvis felt something break inside his chest. not his heart. Something deeper, something that had been holding him together for years finally snapped, and a rage unlike anything he'd ever experienced began burning in his veins. "I'm going to kill them. I'm going to kill every last one of them." "Elvis, no, that's exactly what they want. They want you to do something stupid so they can eliminate you and make it look justified." Jennifer spoke up. "There's another problem. While you've been gathering evidence against Parker, he's been gathering evidence against you. He has recordings of you discussing drug purchases, tax evasion, and some personal indiscretions that could destroy your reputation." "I don't care about my reputation." "You should care about prison," Jennifer said quietly. "Some of the activities on those recordings carry federal charges. If Parker releases them, you won't just lose your career, you'll lose your freedom, and Lisa Marie will lose her father." Elvis looked around the room at the two women who were trying to save him from a trap that had been 20 years in the making. He thought about his mother, buried in the meditation garden outside, and the promises he'd made to her about being a good man. He thought about his daughter, innocent and beautiful, and now targeted by monsters because of who her father was. And he thought about the boxes of evidence he'd been collecting in the basement of Graceland. Evidence that could expose Parker and the mob connections, but would also expose his own complicity in a criminal enterprise he'd never fully understood. That's when Elvis realized the horrible truth. He couldn't escape without destroying himself, but staying meant accepting that his daughter would grow up under the shadow of people who had already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. "There's something else," Priscilla whispered. "David Morrison told me that someone in your inner circle has been working with the FBI all along, someone who's been reporting on your activities for years." Elvis and Jennifer exchanged glances. They both knew she was talking about someone other than Jennifer, someone who had been in Elvis's life much longer, someone he had trusted completely. "Who?" Elvis asked, though part of him already knew the answer was going to destroy him. "Your father." The words hit Elvis like a sledgehammer to the chest. Vernon Presley, the man who had raised him, guided him, stood by his side through every triumph and tragedy, had been betraying him to federal agents. Vernon has been taking payments from the FBI since 1971. $25,000 a year to report on your activities, your associates, and your plans. Elvis doubled over like he'd been punched in the stomach. His own father, the last person on earth he thought he could trust, had been selling him out for pocket change. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway made all three of them freeze. Through the window, they could see Vernon Presley walking toward the house, and he wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits were following him, and the looks on their faces suggested this wasn't a social call. Elvis looked at the evidence scattered across his coffee table, then at the two women who had risked everything to warn him. He had maybe 30 seconds before Vernon and his federal handlers walked through the door. 30 seconds to decide whether to fight a war he couldn't win, or surrender and spend the rest of his life as a puppet dancing for criminals and government agents. That's when Elvis Presley made the choice that would define his final months on Earth. He grabbed the gasoline can from the garage and headed for the basement. August 16, 1977, 6 in the morning, 10 hours before the world would lose Elvis Presley forever. Elvis stood in the basement of Graceland, surrounded by towers of cardboard boxes containing evidence that could bring down the most powerful entertainment empire in history. In his hands, the red gasoline can and book of matches that would erase 20 years of systematic corruption and betrayal. But he wasn't alone. Jennifer Walsh stood behind him, no longer the FBI agent sent to spy on Elvis Presley, but a woman who had made the hardest choice of her career. 3 hours earlier, she had received a phone call that changed everything. "Agent Walsh, this is Director Peterson. You have new orders regarding the Elvis Presley operation." "Sir, I've already filed my report. The subject is not involved in espionage activities." "Your report has been disregarded. We have credible intelligence that Presley is planning to expose classified government operations. He's become a clear and present danger to national security. Jennifer felt ice water in her veins. "What are my orders, sir?" "Eliminate the threat. Make it look like an accidental overdose. You have pharmaceutical access through his medical records. Tonight, Agent Walsh. It ends tonight." That's when Jennifer Walsh crossed a line no federal agent is supposed to cross. She hung up on her superior, destroyed her communication device, and chose to protect the man she was ordered to kill. "Elvis, they're not just trying to control you anymore. They want you dead." Elvis looked up from the gasoline can. His face was calm in a way that terrified her. The panic and rage from the night before had been replaced by something far more dangerous: acceptance. "I know, that's why I'm doing this. There has to be another way." "Jennifer, I've been thinking about this all night. Look at this evidence. Financial records proving the mob has been stealing from me for decades. Government documents showing federal agents have been using me as an unwitting asset in criminal investigations. Recordings of Parker admitting to blackmail and extortion." Elvis gestured at the boxes around them. "If I release this, it doesn't just destroy Parker. It exposes how deep the corruption goes. The entertainment industry, the government, organized crime, all connected, all using artists like me as pawns in a game we never knew we were playing. But if you burn it, the truth dies with the evidence." Elvis smiled sadly. "No, it doesn't, because I'm not burning all of it." He walked to the far corner of the basement and pulled out a single cardboard box, smaller than the others, sealed with multiple layers of tape. This box contains the most damaging evidence: recordings of conversations between Colonel Parker and federal agents, financial records showing government payments to my father for surveillance reports. Most importantly, audio recordings of Nixon administration officials discussing plans to use celebrity surveillance as a model for monitoring all American citizens. Jennifer stared at the box. "You're talking about recordings that could bring down the government." "I'm talking about recordings that prove the American people have been systematically betrayed by the institutions they trust most." Elvis handed her the box. "I want you to hide this, somewhere safe, somewhere it can't be found unless something happens to me or my daughter." "Elvis, what are you planning?" "I'm going to fake my own death." The words hung in the basement air like a death sentence. Jennifer felt the world tilt on its axis. "You can't be serious." "It's the only way out. If Elvis Presley dies, the government stops hunting him. The mob stops threatening his daughter. Colonel Parker loses his leverage. And maybe someday, when Lisa Marie is old enough to understand, the truth can come out." Elvis began pouring gasoline over the remaining boxes. "Tonight, I'm going to take a massive dose of prescription drugs, enough to simulate death convincingly. You're going to wait exactly 47 minutes, then call the paramedics. That gives me enough time to appear dead without actually dying, and gives you enough time to get me out of Graceland before the scene gets contaminated by federal agents." "Elvis, this is insane. What if the timing is wrong? What if you actually die?" Elvis stopped pouring and looked at her with eyes that had already accepted the worst possible outcome. "Then Lisa Marie grows up free from this nightmare, and someday the evidence in that box will tell her the truth about what happened to her father." Jennifer was crying now. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way. I've been trapped in this web since I was 19 years old. Every choice I've made, every person I've trusted, every success I've achieved has been controlled by people who see me as nothing but a source of money and power. Tonight, I take back control." Elvis lit the match. The flames spread quickly, consuming decades of evidence in minutes. Financial records, photographs, recordings, legal documents. The paper trail of Elvis Presley's exploitation burned away like his childhood dreams of simple success. But Jennifer Walsh did exactly what Elvis asked her to do. She took the hidden box and disappeared into the Memphis night, carrying with her the proof that would someday rewrite American history. What happened next has been debated for nearly 50 years. At 10:30 that night, Elvis was found unconscious in his Graceland bathroom. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia related to prescription drug abuse, but the timing Jennifer had been given was wrong, not because of her mistake, but because federal agents had arrived at Graceland earlier than expected, forcing her to call paramedics too late to save him. Whether Elvis Presley died accidentally while attempting to fake his death, or was murdered by government agents who couldn't risk letting him live, remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. But here's what we know for certain. In 2019, a 75-year-old woman named Jennifer Walsh, dying of pancreatic cancer in a Memphis hospital, called a local investigative journalist and told him about a box she had hidden 42 years earlier. The box was exactly where she said it would be, hidden behind a false wall in the basement of a Memphis storage facility, containing audio recordings that proved the American government had been systematically surveilling and manipulating entertainers since the 1960s. The recordings revealed that Elvis Presley's death marked the end of a program called Operation Spotlight, designed to use celebrity surveillance as a testing ground for mass public monitoring techniques that would later become standard practice in the digital age. Elvis Presley died as he had lived for most of his career, trapped between forces that wanted to control him, use him, and ultimately destroy him when he became too dangerous to manage. The box Jennifer Walsh hid still contains evidence that could rewrite our understanding of government overreach, entertainment industry corruption, and the price of fame in America. But Elvis's estate continues to deny its existence, and federal authorities claim any such recordings would be inadmissible in court due to the passage of time. That night in the basement of Graceland, Elvis Presley wasn't just burning papers. He was burning bridges to a life that was never really his own. The king of rock and roll died as he lived, trapped between people who claimed to love him and forces determined to control him. But the question that haunts everyone who knows this story remains unanswered. If Elvis had succeeded in faking his death, would he have eventually exposed the truth? Or would he have remained in hiding forever, watching his legend grow while his daughter grew up believing he had abandoned her for fame? The answer lies buried somewhere in the Memphis soil, along with the man who carried more secrets to his grave than any entertainer in American history. Elvis spent his final hours trying to protect the people he loved from the consequences of his fame. He chose his daughter's safety over his own freedom, his family's future over his legacy's truth. If you had that choice, sacrifice everything to save your child, what would you do? The comments below are filled with people wrestling with that same impossible decision. Share your story, because sometimes the most important conversations happen in the shadows where truth lives.